They're the officers who investigate the most serious crime, the men and women of the New Zealand Police Criminal Investigation Branch.
It's tough. You're dealing with some of society's worst bloody human beings.
Hand-picked and highly trained, the detectives target killers, rapists, robbers and crooks and deliver them to justice.
There's not too many occupations where the only product at the end of the day that you've got to sell is a term of life imprisonment.
Dedicated, skilled investigators tell their stories. New Zealand detectives in pursuit of the truth.
The purpose of the investigation is to establish the truth.
Every night on the TV news, we're bombarded with images of crime, but we only hear some of the story. What really happens on the other side of that crime scene tape? The detectives of the CIB can call on the latest technology and techniques, but to be a good detective, you must first learn to talk and learn to listen.
The biggest tool anyone will ever say a detective has is ability to talk to people and encourage people to share truths.
To be able to converse on many levels, from talking to a bank manager to talking to a drug addict.
To get a rapport with people, to have them tell you things that in some times they've never told anybody else.
That's what comes up time and time in inquiry. And if you don't ask, you don't find.
Good communication proved crucial in a 2006 murder mystery, starting with talking to the media.
He has had his hands severed from his body, and I suspect there may have been also an attempt to sever his head.
The hands had been severed off. So our traditional method of fingerprinting to identify a body in this condition wasn't immediately available to us.
Detective Inspector Mike Arnerich knows that every crime scene tells a tale.
I remember going around there and having a look at the scene, and there's just a beach with a drag mark coming out of the beach, and we had our special search group out there doing the search, and there's about 10 of these guys on the ground, freezing cold, southerly coming in, all suited up in protective cross-contamination clothing, and they're going through stone by stone every piece of pebble along these drag marks. And I actually thought to myself, what the heck are they ever going to get out of there? And in those drag marks alone, I think they found a couple of hundred seal hairs and some bird eyelashes, but they also found about 10 spots of blood, which was just crucial, which proved where the body had been put into the water. And they also found a cigarette butt.
An appeal for witnesses brought reports of a dark Subaru stuck on the beach the week before.
We're very interested in the movements of that Subaru, and certainly will be investigating whether or not it's connected to the body being recovered at Fero Bay.
But who was the dead man?
Our fingerprint techs, amazing experts. They looked at the stumps of these hands and were able to find a very minute piece of skin off one of the arms that they were then able to take back and compare against fingerprints which we had on record.
The tiny piece of palm print revealed the man's identity as Tony Stanlake. He had cannabis convictions, so detectives started investigating who he'd been talking to by checking his phone records. One name kept coming up, Daniel Moore.
Daniel Moore was living at a house in Strathaven, $600 a week rent, and he was unemployed, so the money was coming from somewhere.
Moore was put under surveillance.
He went to the tip and dropped some stuff off there. Once he left, we slipped the detective in behind to have a look at what it was, and then we found some cannabis hydroponics growing setup. So we started to get a sense of what this was all about, and ended up at a house in Wainuiomata. And when he was there, one of our surveillance officers was able to see that the door of a garage was open at the address and could see a Subaru. And of course the Subaru was what we had been looking for a number of days, because it had been seen at the beach where the body had been dumped.
Detectives had what's called good cause to suspect. and arrested the 21-year-old.
Making an arrest is the easiest part of an investigation. To get a conviction, you've got to get a lot of evidence. So the public, and dare I say it, even some police think you've made an arrest, that's the end of the investigation. That's just the start of the investigation, and there's months and months of work to go on after that to raise that level of evidence from good cause to suspect to beyond reasonable doubt.
The painstaking search for evidence turned up telltale clues.
We found some receipts for a set of secateurs. So you go out to Bunnings warehouse where they were purchased, and one set of secateurs being purchased from Bunnings, you think, who on earth is going to remember ever selling those?
But a good detective knows that just one comment from one person can give them the edge.
That's what comes up time and time in inquiry. If you don't ask, you don't find. The detective goes out there, finds a person who remembers a person coming in on that day to buy the secateurs, and he said, I wouldn't actually recommend those, they're not the best quality ones, perhaps you should go for another set. And Daniel Moore said, no, I only need these for one job.
Searching Moore's house had also turned up receipts for a mallet and an axe. And across town at the Wainuiamata house, they found that axe and the mallet with Tony Stanlake's blood on it.
So all those pieces of puzzle start to fit together, and that's what it is. It's a giant jigsaw puzzle that gets thrown up in the air, and you've got to put it all together again.
After 6 months of painstaking investigating, the 80-strong inquiry team finally had all the pieces of the puzzle.
Daniel Moore had decided that he no longer needed Tony Stanlake, so that he was going to kill him. And so he started to plan how this was going to happen. He arranged for his flatmates to be out of the house that night, even gave one of them his car to make sure he was gone. When Tony Stanlake came round, Tony would never have known what was going to happen. They would have gone into the garage where the grow was going on. Stanlake would have gone first, very interested in what was going on, hadn't seen the grow for a while. Moore behind him, picks up the mallet, smashes him over the head, kills him. After a number of days, he needed to dispose of the body. So he'd got tarpaulins, wrapped it up, dragged it out, put it in his car, went out to Red Rocks and disposed of the body at Red Rocks, threw it into the tide, and then got his car stuck in the shingle out there. And so while he's waiting for someone to come along and help him, he has a cigarette, and of course disposes of the cigarette there, which is what our specialist search group found a week or so later, and that cigarette butt had Daniel Moore's DNA on it.
The small-time drug dealer turned murderer was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment.
I don't normally comment on jury verdicts, but I will say in this case that I agree fully with it.
Why did Daniel Moore do it? Tony Stanlake taught him how to cultivate cannabis really well. He no longer needed Tony Stanlake. Why should he share the profits? Greed.
In the course of the investigation, of course, when there's a homicide, there's a post-mortem takes place, and investigators are there to look at the body and what they can tell us in their state of death about how they died and what went on at the crime scene is them giving evidence in their own court case.
A body in a river would tell a tale of mystery for detectives investigating a suspected murder in 1983.
The body had these red dotted lines, injuries around the neck and on the stomach, and we just couldn't for the life of us work out what they were or what had caused them.
They looked as though he may have been whipped with a chain or bound up with barbed wire, and nobody could really understand what they were.
Because we didn't know who this person was, we fingerprinted the body and discovered that he was known to the police, had a minor conviction, and his name was Harkin. So once we learned his identity, then we started tracing his movements.
Routine inquiries provided a crucial lead when detectives spoke to someone who'd seen a person fitting Harkin's description at a nearby burger bar the night before.
The staff there said yes, he was here with a woman, and in fact he gave us a $20 cheque, and the hamburger was worth $1.50, and we gave him $18.50 change, and we've still got the cheque in the banking. Here's the cheque.
The Pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the biggest surprises were still to come. A violent death had left few clues for detectives. Talking to people in the area helped fill in the blanks and led the detectives to a nearby block of flats.
Hey, what the fuck?
We executed search warrants early in the morning, and lo and behold, we found some of the deceased's property, like the checkbook, a wallet, a watch.
The trio at the flat had some explaining to do.
The young fellow I interviewed was a young fellow called Manahira.
We followed them to the burger bar.
He came from a small township about 40 miles outside of Rotorua, had never ever spoken to a policeman before he spoke to me. And during the course of that day, over an interview that probably took something like about 5 or 6 hours, he unfolded the story about how he and his 2 colleagues had murdered Mark Harkin for the money that he had.
Harkin had been drinking in the Hutt Park Hotel when the girl chatted him up and lured him outside with the intention of robbing him.
When the girl got him outside, she discovered he had no money, that he'd spent all his money. So she conned him into going to the hamburger bar, cashing a cheque for $20. She took him down the riverbank behind a warehouse where the 2 guys were.
In the attack, Harkin was strangled and killed.
Get the fucking cash for it. Let's go. Let's go. Let's chuck him in the river. Okay. Oh, he's a fat bastard.
These first-time murderers thought the body would be carried out to sea.
What they couldn't see at night time is that Harkin's leg had been jammed in some railings underneath the surface of the water. And so he wasn't floating away and he wasn't going anywhere. And so they jumped on him from the bank to try and get him to sink and to be washed out into Wellington Harbour. And he wouldn't go, and his body stayed floating in the water. So they thought that they needed to cut him open. And they didn't really have any knives, but they were rural New Zealand boys, and they had spurs on their boots. And so the spurs were taken off the back of the boots, and they ran them up and down Mark's body to try and puncture him, to let the air out that they thought was the reason why he was floating.
Manahira and his 2 friends went to prison for life for the murder.
All for a $1.50 hamburger and $18.
People often ask me if I was disturbed by what I'd seen in crime, dead folk, children, post-mortem examinations. None of that ever impacted upon me at all, but the Harkin homicide was the only one where I had nightmares, and I had nightmares over the young boy Manahira telling me about how the murder occurred. And it was based around the fact that it was a Sunday in Petone when we were conducting the interview, so I sent away these police officers to get us some food to eat, and all they could find were these stale mince pies that had been in a warmer in some dairy for days and days and days. And so we sat there and ate these little mince pies and talked about murdering this man. And I had these horrific nightmares about eating food and seeing people floating in the river. And whenever I saw the person floating in the river, I was always eating these awful mince pies.
Interviewing is a key skill for detectives, one that takes time to master.
You need to be a good all-rounder, a man or a woman for all seasons. You need to be sympathetic, you need to be a good listener. You need to have a quiet approach, you need to have a tough approach. All suspects, all offenders are all different, and you've just got to find the right buttons to push to get them motivated to roll over and tell the truth.
I was always concerned about a detective who returned about 30 minutes into an interview and said that the suspect wasn't going to make any admissions. I'm a firm believer that it takes 2 or 3 hours to actually get to know the suspect and to look at what makes them tick.
I can still remember the first interview I did in the CIB, and it was a young fellow who'd stolen a Falcon motor car, and it had been recovered, and he'd been hiding away in Rotorua in the bush for some time. Anyway, he was there in the cells, and I was plucked and told to go and interview him about other offences. So away I went, 5 minutes in the CIB after my induction course, and thought, right, well, what do I do? So I went in and said to him, "G'day, this is who I am, who are you?" Talked to him briefly, and he said, "No, haven't done anything else, that's it." So I went out and said to my detective sergeant, well, no, he said he hasn't done any more. So I was told to get back in there and talk to him and don't come out until you know some more. So I went, in fact, I actually ended up speaking to that fellow over the course of 2 days for hours and hours and hours, and he coughed to 100-odd unlawful takings. So, but I didn't know how to go about it.
Sometimes an unorthodox approach to interviewing is the only way to get a result. Dave Whitford recalls interviewing the head of the mongrel mob about an alleged gang rape.
I tried to talk to him, and I tried to use all the different tactics and openings and styles that I thought would work, to no avail. And he just sat there and would not say a word. So I thought, right, last resort. I pulled out a brand new notebook, wrote his name down, time, date and place, issued him the full caution, and I put Q for question. I asked the question and then wrote it down. I then put A, and your answer is? Stony silence. And so I would then write an answer out. And as I'm writing the answer out, I'd read it out.
And offered her a ride.
I literally filled my notebook with questions and answers, with him sitting on the in the room, and he hadn't said a word.
Question.
For probably 2 hours. But I could see that he is starting to get agitated.
I decided to get into her pants.
And all of a sudden, he just blurted out,
"It's not what fucking happened."
And I said, great, wonderful. Now's your opportunity. If that's not what happened, you tell me what did happen. And so he started talking. And as a result of that, I took a statement, and all of his other mates were being very staunch, and so we then circulated that statement round to all the other interviewing officers, and so they all crumbled at the end of the day as a result of me finally getting the breakthrough with this fellow. And he looked at me, he said, were you going to stand up and give that evidence in court? And I said, you'll never know, will you? And I put the notebook away and I destroyed it later on, but he'll never know, and I wasn't going to give him the benefit of an answer.
I interviewed a guy once, just as the New Zealand Bill of Rights are coming in. He'd robbed a taxi driver at night point. And so I was very conscious about bending over backwards to keep people happy and so forth. So I said to him, I said, "You're quite happy where you are?" And he says, "Oh, I'm happy." So he's in the interview room. He says, "Anything I can get you?" And I said, "A lawyer, for example?" And he says to me, "Oh, do you know one?" I said, "I can know one, I'll get you one straight away." He said, "Okay." So he's just sitting there. And I said, "Coffee? Hamburger?" He said, "Oh, yeah." So I got his hamburger, coffee. And he says to me, he said, "You know that film, The Conan the Barbarian, with Arnold Schwarzenegger?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "It's on at 7 o'clock. He said, "I couldn't see it, could I?" I said, "You want a TV? I'll get you a TV." And we had a 26-inch TV, so I wheeled it in. So he's now watching TV. And now I got him a hamburger, and his hamburger's watching TV. And this you might not want to put in a thing. But anyway, he says to me, "Can you turn the light off?" I said, "Why?" He said, because he's looking across at the Carlton Hotel or whatever it was in those days, and obviously he's looking through a window and there's a girl taking her clothes off, you see. So, he's sitting there and he's watching TV, Conan Barbarian, eating food, watching a girl take her clothes off. I'm getting him a lawyer, Old detectives would just roll in the grave, this thing. But when I ring the lawyer, I told the lawyer what I'm telling you, and he says, you are kidding, aren't you? I said, "No, I'm not kidding." He said, "Can I speak to him?" I said, "Certainly." Then he puts me back on the phone. He said, "Yeah." He said, "He'll admit everything, make a statement." I said, "Thank you very much." Make a statement. He said, can I just watch the movie first?" "You watch the movie."
And then he sat there and took the whole statement. And then I was talking to another hardened detective walked by, and I said, "Do you think we've been doing it wrong all these years?"
Detectives know the best information can sometimes come from the most unlikely source. When one homeless man stabbed and killed another on Terry Batchelor's patch, the only witnesses were notoriously unreliable.
One old lad came up to me and he hadn't shaved for a few days, and he's an archetype lag. He said to me, "Can I speak to you, please, detective?" Oh, I was quite taken back with the way he could speak, quite a clipped, intelligent sort of voice. And I said, "Yes." And he said to me, "I probably saw as much as could possibly be seen leading up to the event," he said, "of where," he said, "a other person was killed." I said, "Really?" So I thought, now, either he's really having me on or he's genuine. So he said to me, "Would you like to take a statement from me?" I thought, hold on, I should be saying this to you, I said, "Oh, sure." So I got the old Imperial typewriter, it weighed half a tonne, put my A4 paper on it, and I had my 2 fingers at the ready, because I was only, for 30 years I've been a 2-finger typist. He said to me, "All right." He said, "Well, begin."
1100 hours, I was walking along Newton Gully, and I saw a man running.
And I'm going, "I can't believe this. Can you just slap a bit?" So anyway, the then thing, we get to the description of the old lag that obviously had stabbed the other old lag. And he said to me,
"Look, do you want me to draw him for you?"
Really? Sketch him for you. Sketch him? That'd be brilliant.
So I gave him a piece of paper, gave him a pencil. So he's sitting there drawing him. I couldn't believe it. So he's drawing him, and he was obviously quite an artist. And I was still taking a statement, and he was dictating that. And then when he wasn't doing that, he was actually filling out the crossword as fast as he could put the letters in. Anyway, the next day, I was with another detective, and we were going down to an area in Williamson Avenue. It was an old house, but it was a halfway house for all these legs. And we walked down the corridor, and we walked into one of the bedrooms, and there, sitting on the edge of the bed, was a person that fitted the description of that drawing 100%. It was just a spit image.
I was wondering when you were going to show up.
That was it. And we solved the case.
I remember one person that I dealt with, and I arrested him for burglary, and then I think I arrested him for a couple more offences.
It's going to start being a bit of a habit of yours, is it?
No, miss.
And he was a gang prospect, and he was young, and it was pretty clear that he was on a path to destruction. And I just dealt with him pretty much the way I'd dealt with anybody, but I noticed he kept coming back and would want to have a chat about certain things. And after probably about a period of 12 months, when we were having a talk one time when I'd arrested him for an offence and was just trying to get to the bottom of, why he kept doing this, he told me that he had been the victim of sexual abuse from somebody else in the gang. And then I started investigating that, and we found another person within the gang whom was saying the same thing. They also had been a victim to this man, and we ended up taking it to court. These were people who, on the whole, probably thought that police, all we wanted to do was lock them up and chuck them away because they were in the gang. And for them to get to the point where they felt that me as a police officer was somebody that they could actually open up to and tell that to. And in relation of the male prospect, I was the first person he had ever discussed that he had been the victim of abuse, and have faith in me to do the right thing. That said a lot. And we actually lost the trial. But the woman that I'm talking about in this case, do you know that only last year I got a phone call saying there was somebody at the front of the police station for me, and she'd actually brought in her 2 children to show me, to say, I've done okay, and here are my children. It was actually pretty rewarding.
But even when there's no one to talk to, a good detective doesn't stop questioning. Every crime scene will tell a tale if you know what you're listening for.
You don't despair from the outset by looking at the scene and thinking it's been destroyed to the point of being valueless. Even just a person walking across a bare floor is going to leave some sign of their passing.
Bob Meikle was called to an arson scene where a man had been killed. Detectives suspected the man's older brother, but it seemed any evidence in the house had been destroyed.
The house had been quite severely damaged, and at first glance you'd think, well, what the devil can we get out of that? You know, water damage, fire damage, and then the efforts of the fire brigade in extinguishing the fire.
Amongst the ashes, the detectives found a torch.
We showed it to the housekeeper, and she had never seen that torch before. So it was reasonable to assume that that was brought to the scene by the offender.
On a hunch, Meikle requested that the batteries be fingerprinted.
It was likely that when those batteries were inserted in that torch, the person inserting them had no idea of using it at the scene of a murder. And so it proved. An identifiable fingerprint of the older brother was found on the batteries.
Old school detectives knew that to catch the bad guys, they needed to get close to them, even if it meant drinking with the enemy.
It used to be a game of cops and robbers. It was the baddies and the goodies. Your job was to catch them. Their job was to commit crime. And there was nothing personal about it.
CIB members knew all of the crims in Christchurch. And when we had probably a different relationship with them.
We had hotels allocated to us that you had to. These three hotels are the hotels that you need to know who the barmen are, who the management is, the criminals that drink there.
You weren't trying to be undercover or anything like that, so they would communicate with you, they'd know who you were. They wouldn't necessarily tell you anything that you wanted to know, but there was the pretense of communication, I guess.
That was really, what was expected of detectives, is that you knew your patch.
Some bars were notorious, and detectives weren't surprised when things turned nasty at a Christmas party at the Sunset Strip nightclub.
I said it's a simple solution. We need to know what happened. It's a murder, it's a serious crime, so you can go home when I know what happened.
One of the biggest challenges for detectives is trying to get the truth out of those who don't want to talk, like the guests at a Christmas party for crooks.
I was home and the phone would have gone around about 4 o'clock in the morning. A report of a stabbing in a nightclub. So I gave certain instructions. No one was to leave. Everybody was detained in the club until I arrived.
So we were confronted with 70 to 80 drunken folk who simply didn't like the police. They were the elite of Wellington's crime scene, and a dead body.
The dead man wasn't saying anything, and neither was anyone else.
Hurry it up, come on.
It wasn't known at that stage who had done it and what had happened.
Come on.
So I ordered up some buses and took everybody to the Central Police Station, much to their consternation.
Detectives examining the scene thought they had a breakthrough when they found a blood-stained knife. But their hopes were soon dashed.
There were 38 knives we seized in that crime scene. I don't know how many of them had human blood on them, but I'd venture to suggest that probably 37 of them did. A lot of cannabis bullets and cannabis cigarettes, because these patrons had been there on their own and knew the police were coming to take them back to the police station, and quite rightly shed themselves of anything that was incriminating.
With so many suspects and weapons, detectives turned to science to reveal invisible bloodstains, which might shed light on the case. The chemical luminol makes blood glow in the dark, even if the blood has been wiped away.
And it lit up like a fairy cake. There was blood everywhere. There was blood smears on the wall, there was blood on the carpet, there was blood everywhere, which had probably been there from numerous fights and altercations in the nightclub over the previous year or two, but it was a lot.
Finally, the partygoers in custody found their tongues, and detectives had a name.
John Morgan was a fellow who'd had many brushes with the law and had a heap of convictions. And he was known as being a pretty volatile fellow. We got information that he was out at the Silver Stream tip.
Where he was disposing of material, clothing and stuff. So when the police approached him, he took off.
And we endeavoured to stop him at that stage, but he wasn't really interested in stopping for us. He went on this rampaging drive, crashing through barriers and police cars, and no matter what we tried to do to stop him, he fooled us every time. He ended up driving off the road onto some farmland where he was being pursued by a police dog handler and others. He's across the stream from us. We were trying to negotiate him to come back, and talk to us. And he got out of the Land Rover. He was challenged by the police dog handler, and the police dog handler, for a very good reason, feared for his life.
He threw an axe at a dog handler.
And so the police dog handler shot him.
While I was at the mortuary attending to the post-mortem of the victim, Morgan's body arrived as well, so we had both the offender and the victim in the same mortuary at the same time.
A tragic end to a violent tale. But without the tip-off that led detectives to Morgan, the murder may have never been solved. Informants have long been a powerful tool in the work of the detectives.
Without informants, the police couldn't exist. Some people can run informants very, very well, and it's an art.
One evening, I received a call from an informant to tell me that an armed hold-up on a service station that had been committed earlier in the evening was committed by 3 people that she named. And so I phoned the duty inspector who was working at the time and told him that the names of the offenders. And he went away and came back and he said, "Look, your informant's wrong on this occasion." He said, "There's been no armed hold-up." So he hung up and within minutes phoned back and said, "Give us the name of those people. The offence has just happened." The
best informer I operated in my police career had some information that he thought might assist. And we came to an agreement that he would give it to me for a small financial return. It was incredibly small. And in fact, over 20 years of working for me as an informer, he would have been paid a pittance. I don't think it would amount to $10,000 in total. And yet he solved homicide investigations and murders and all sorts of crimes.
Informants can be a detective's eyes and ears in the criminal scene, but another all-seeing eye is all around us every day and can provide crucial evidence. When a suitcase floating in Auckland Harbour was found to contain the body of a young Chinese man, detectives were at a loss to identify the victim of this grisly crime.
His head had been almost completely cut off, and it was obvious that the compass saws that were in the suitcase had been used to do that. In the suitcase was bloodied towels, a knife, a pair of saws, and some clothing.
And amongst the clothing, the strongest lead as to whom the dead man might be.
In the pocket of a pair of cargo pants in the suitcase was a passport of a young Chinese man. And the mortuary technician and the pathologist said, "Oh, there's no mystery about who this man is. There he is." And I had a look at the passport and I said, "No, that's not him."
The mystery deepened. If the man in the passport was not the man in the suitcase, then how was he connected? Detectives looked to the suitcase contents for further leads, like the saws bought from the downtown warehouse.
On the Thursday afternoon, a chap had been in there to buy 2 compass saws. And furthermore, we had his credit card number. And furthermore, the store had security recordings of him coming up and down the escalator.
Detectives were ready to bring the man in, but they were too late.
We discovered that on the Friday afternoon, the person that the credit card had been issued to had left New Zealand for Australia.
Soon after, a Chinese national living in Auckland contacted police at the request of his friends in China. Their son had phoned from Auckland the previous night, highly distressed, saying he'd been kidnapped.
So Mr. Zia was able to describe a particularly distinctive body mark that we were able to use to confirm his identification. He was surname Wan, first name Biao, 19 years old. He was a student.
Another piece of the puzzle fell into place when detectives located the man whose passport was found in the suitcase.
We were able to view security camera recordings for that building and were able to identify the passport holder and the man who had bought the compass saws entering and leaving that apartment at various times.
The tales told by video surveillance would paint a damning picture of a callous murder. When the mutilated body of a Chinese man was found in a suitcase in Auckland Harbour, it didn't take detectives long to pick up the trail of the men responsible. One of them had left his passport in the suitcase, along with bloody towels from an inner-city hotel, where detectives found telltale signs of a violent assault.
A luminol examination showed that there had been a clean-up of a fairly large blood spill in the bathroom of that hotel room. Examination of the security camera recordings showed our deceased in company with a couple of people that were starting to look familiar to us from the warehouse security recording and the Hobson Street apartment security recordings.
Detectives pieced together all the footage from the night. It makes chilling viewing. Two of the offenders go to their flat to collect an empty suitcase. They pop out for a snack at McDonald's. And later they drag the now very heavy suitcase out of the apartment. Catch a taxi to the wharves, drag the body and the bag along the wharf and disappear out of shot. They then stroll back with no suitcase. Detectives now had enough to bring in the suspects.
The owner of the passport, Mr. Li Zheng, was pretty cool during his interview until he was asked where his passport was, and he started telling us it was back at the apartment at Hobson Street, and then the detective showed him the passport and he just went quite quiet and white and asked for a lawyer and availed himself of his right to silence from there on.
The man in Australia was arrested and extradited and all went to prison for the crime. Refusing to talk to detectives doesn't help when a picture paints 1,000 words. An investigator's gift of the gab could do more than solve a case. It could well save a life, as detectives would discover during a case that started with a missing person.
She was last seen within about 200 yards of her home.
She was leaning in the left-hand window of a car door in the main street of Waimate, talking to a driver.
One of the residents there approached the police several times with tidbits of information.
He couldn't identify the vehicle, he couldn't relate the make, manufacturer, he couldn't relate the colour. But the one thing that stuck in his mind about that vehicle was that the left-hand headlamp was yellow. You couldn't shake him on that point.
Some days later, one of the detectives was returning back to the office and passed a car with that description. He turned around and we brought the suspect in.
He was interviewed at some length by another detective and myself. Denied any involvement whatsoever.
The farmer was a prime suspect, but detectives decided to let him return home, with Neville Stokes sticking close to him until the police search team arrived at dawn.
I was somewhat amazed when he arrived home that he announced that he was going to bring the sheep in from the rear of the property into the yards. I tried to talk him out of this, but was unable to. He wasn't under arrest, so I said that I'd accompany him. he said that there was no four-wheel drive and it wouldn't be possible. He only had one horse. I noticed that there was, in fact, another horse there and suggested to him that I would ride the other horse. And he said, well, that wasn't really possible because the horse had been turned out, not used for some time, would be very flighty, and that in any event he didn't have a second saddle. By this time, of course, I was absolutely convinced that he was up to no good. Fortunately, I was from a country background and had some experience with horses, and I said that I would ride the other horse despite that. Got a sore backside riding this horse all around his property for several hours. When we arrived back, I started to help him draft the sheep.
He saw the search team up on the hill about to lift the lid of the offal pit.
I need a cover.
Offal pits were used to dispose of sheep carcasses, the perfect place to dump a body.
I was relieved by Pat O'Donovan, who took my place.
Get in here and shut the door.
Before anyone knew what had happened, the offender had grabbed a rifle and taken Detective Pat O'Donovan hostage.
I was able to see Pat and the offender moving around the house, and he talked of shooting Pat and then himself.
Armed with nothing but his sharp wits, O'Donovan continued to talk calmly with the panicking gunman.
Pat came out with the offender. Pat actually, while the man held a firearm, took a written statement in his notebook admitting the rape, the murder and the disposal of the body, etc. And I recall saying to Pat that at least this will be one occasion, Pat, where the defence can't allege that the statement was taken under police duress.
Understanding what made the offender tick, knowing how to talk and listen to him had secured the conviction and saved O'Donovan's life. But for detectives skilled in communication, the hardest part can be not talking about their cases. What went on in an inquiry didn't get discussed around the table at home.
There was a point in our house, and I think it was a procedure adopted by most detectives. What went on and what you were doing at work never went home. My family never knew what I was engaged in.
Some of the particular gruesome detail you don't want to discuss with your family. I mean, I have in the past, and I've been sort of told off because it's not something that normal cops, partners want to hear all the time.
I don't bring it home. I don't focus on the tragedy of it because I can't afford to do that. I can't afford to be a blithering mess at a briefing in the morning because it does no one any good. Does the victim no good? Does the family no good? Certainly doesn't do the staff any good. So you compartmentalise it, I suppose.
I probably am resilient, but I'd be lying to you if I said that an odd case now and then that I don't go home and cry in the shower.
You used to come home in the middle of the night, particularly involving homicides with young children, and even go into your room with your kids and buddies, see that they're safe, and even sit there on the end of the bed.
Next week, detectives learn an explosive lesson in attention to detail.
The walls were all punched in, the windows were all gone, parts of the house were found on the neighbours' properties.
DNA testing adds a new weapon to the detective's arsenal.
She would have fought for a knife, and that was the case because she scratched him.
And piecing together the puzzle after a vicious assault.
The injuries were incredible and they were never survivable.